So today, what we're going to be talking about is Saddha, faith. And so for those people who can remember all the way back to last week, you remember that Bhante Akāliko was talking about the five indriyas, five controlling faculties, or spiritual faculties, as they're sometimes called. And so these are, of course, Saddha, faith, Virya, energy, Sati, mindfulness, Samadhi, stillness, and Panya, wisdom. So they're the five spiritual faculties. And so today I just wanted to talk about the first one in a little bit more detail, Saddha. So Saddha is a very important part of the Buddhist path. And again, this idea of these things sometimes hiding in plain sight. So Saddha is something that we've already practiced today. We've already practiced this generation of faith in our practice. Because usually when we talk about faith in Buddhism, we're talking about faith in the Triple Gem. And one of the strongest ways that we can show our faith in the Triple Gem is to go for refuge. We already did that with our chanting. We recited Namo Tassa. We acknowledged the qualities of the Buddha. And we went for refuge to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha 3 times, just to make sure. Maybe some of us have already forgotten we've done it. And then we recited the anussitis, the recollections of the Triple Gem, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So these are ways that we practice saddha, developing saddha in our practice. These are ways that we generate faith and conviction in the Buddhist path. And this is a really important part of our practice. So if we don't have confidence in the Buddhist teachings, then we're not going to pay much attention, we're not going to listen, we're not going to lend ear, we're not going to remember the teachings, we're not going to allow those teachings to impact our heart, and we're not going to develop in the Dhamma, come out of ignorance, hate, and greed. We're not going to be able to find a way out of suffering. So having some confidence in the Triple Gem is very important. And when the Buddha talked about faith, he often talked about it as something that is like a foundation pillar, something that is really strong and really stable and steady. In the simile of the fortress, he uses this idea of this foundation post, which supports the fortress and protects the people who are inside from invasion. He also talks about Saddha as being like a giant tree, like one of those Port Jackson figs or a banyan tree or a giant Bodhi tree. A big tree that is a home to many birds and animals, provides shade and shelter. And this, he said, is like a person who has faith. A person who has faith is a refuge for others and creates a lot of benefit for other living beings. Whether a lay person or an ordained person, this person who has faith provides a refuge for other lay people and also for ordained people too. This is a very beautiful image, this idea of faith as being like a foundation pillar or like a tree. So sometimes when we think about this word faith, we might have a couple of different images in our own minds about what faith is. It could be a very devotional practice, lighting incense, lighting candles. It could be praying for success in worldly affairs. So I see this sometimes in Buddhist circles. You see people kind of praying to the Buddha, asking for help, asking for support, asking for a kind of grace. Of course, this isn't the way that the Buddha uses the term saddha. This isn't the kind of faith that we might see in, say, a Christian culture or in devotional practice in other religions. We're not asking the Buddha to help us. We are the owners of our own karma. We have a responsibility to get out of this mess ourselves. No one else can help us in that way. So it's not that kind of faith. And it's not a blind faith either. It's not a faith where we just accept everything that we're told, just believe everything that we encounter. Instead, when the Buddha used this term faith, he was usually talking about an experiential confidence that comes from understanding something for yourself. This is something that we know maybe from the suttas. Perhaps the most famous example of this is in the sutta known as the Kalama's Sutta, where the Buddha is talking to a group of people and they've got some doubt, some uncertainty about what teachings to believe. They're not sure what to do. All the teachers talk about different things. They say to do different things, to believe different things. And so the Buddha says, well, don't go by just listening to other people and believing it. Don't go on hearsay or because they say so, or because it's part of your lineage, your scriptural tradition, or because the speaker is good and seems to know what they're talking about. Or don't even go because it is your teacher. Don't believe them just for these reasons. Because unless you experience these things for yourself, you're not going to be able to gain conviction in them. And so he said, only when you know these things for yourself, that this is wholesome, this is beneficial and skillful, this is going to lead to your welfare and happiness, only then should you accept these things and take them up as your practice, your spiritual practice. And so this is a very interesting version of what we would usually think of as faith. This is much more of a reasoned conviction and understanding based on personal experience. And of course, this kind of faith is like a confidence. This is going to be much more stable and much more steady because you have some ownership of it. When we just hear that we should believe something, it's very easy for that to be blown away, to be buffeted by the winds of the world, for us to be let down or misled or lose confidence in. But when we have this stable faith, it's like that foundation pillar that is based on our own experience, based on our own wisdom, then we can have confidence in that, and it will support us. Because faith and wisdom go together. They help each other. That confidence we have from learning something about the Dhamma means that we are more likely to progress in the Dhamma. We're more likely to move forward. And so this is something that's very important as part of the practice, that we don't just believe, that we look for ourselves and find out for ourselves. And when we've got that, we can look for other things and understand those things. And so faith is kind of contingent. It builds up upon other things that we've already experienced. And this is a really good way to make progress, because you're doing it yourself. So that's very important, the Buddha said. And one way that we can see this, I think, is in the Chula Hathipadopama Sutta, MN 27. So this is about faith in the Buddha and his Dhamma. Especially this sutta talks about our ability to believe in the Buddha's attainments. So some of you might know this sutta, the shorter simile of the elephant's footprint, which is the story of a Brahmin named Janusoni, and he runs into this wanderer called Pilotika. And Pilotika's talking about how he's just seen the Buddha, and the Buddha is such a good debater and has so many followers. He has no doubt that this Buddha is enlightened, based on these pieces of evidence that, he's a good debater, he's a good speaker, he has a lot of followers. And he says that it's like an elephant's footprint. Seeing an elephant's footprint, you can imagine, that there is a great big elephant somewhere, a bull elephant in the forest. And so he says, by inference, you can understand that the Buddha must be enlightened, such a good speaker, has so many followers. And so the Brahmin Janusoni, he goes to the Buddha and repeats this to the Buddha. And the Buddha says, well, no, that simile is not complete at all. He says, a good elephant tracker wouldn't just believe that there's a great big bull elephant in the forest merely on the basis of a footprint. He says, perhaps there's a large female elephant, and it's not the bull elephant that you've been searching for. And just because you see markings on the tree or branches being torn down, that doesn't mean it's a great big elephant. Could be anything. And so here the Buddha is showing us where he places value on accepting his attainment as a fully enlightened being. He doesn't expect people just to believe. And so he uses this simile saying, you follow those footprints, you investigate, you see for yourself. And only when you actually see that big bull elephant sitting or lying down under a tree in the middle of the forest, only then should you accept his attainment is true. It's a very high bar that the Buddha sets. So he goes through this list of things, this gradual training, this gradual list that goes up and up and up along the Buddhist path. And he says the Buddha appears in the world and begins to teach the Dhamma. Someone hears the Dhamma and they gain confidence, they gain faith in the Dhamma. And then, because they're inspired by this faith, they shave their head, they go forth, they become a monastic, and then they start practicing this system of training. They practice good ethics, good conduct. They practice good meditation. They start to get some very deep meditation states, the jhanas. And he says these are still just footprints of the Buddha. You haven't seen the Buddha yet. You can't say for sure, without experience or knowledge yourself, that the Buddha is attained, that the Buddha is enlightened. These are just mere footprints. And so you have to keep going. So the jhana is a very high state of meditation. And then he talks about the tevijjas, the three enlightenment knowledges, as they're often called, which is the ability to see into countless past lives, to understand the workings of karma, and to see the origin and cessation of the taints, the asavas. Even then, he says, you shouldn't just believe that the Buddha is enlightened. Even then, these are just footsteps of the Buddha. But at that stage of the path, he says, you're starting to believe that the Buddha is enlightened. Only when you have seen the destruction of the asavas, seen the destruction of the taints, and have experienced the knowledge and vision of release, only then can you say for sure that the Buddha is fully self-awakened, fully enlightened being. So this is a kind of humble brag, I think, of the Buddha. But it shows, I think, something quite profound about the way that he thought about faith. He doesn't expect you to believe, even in his own enlightenment. Doesn't expect you to believe, doesn't want you to believe it unless you've experienced these things for yourself. And of course, the Buddha saying that, other beings can become enlightened is the ultimate proof of the pudding. So if you want to put it that way, that the Buddha believed, had confidence in his own teaching, that this teaching of the Dhamma can produce noble beings, can produce other enlightened beings. He had full confidence in himself that by teaching this Dhamma will lead to freedom, will lead to release. And so he didn't want people just to believe it based on his own say-so, but to see it for themselves. So this is a process which is a very gradual process. Coming to the Dhamma doesn't mean that we'll suddenly get enlightened, doesn't mean we'll suddenly reach these very high states. That path the Buddha outlined is a gradual instruction, gradual training. And this is why when it comes to developing faith, often people will go for these very high states. They'll think about the potential of their own self to have enlightenment. And they'll think about these, I want to be a stream enterer, I want to be a non-returner, I want to get full enlightenment. And they have some faith, which is great. But when I think about these things, I prefer to think of it much lower down the path. That the way I'm going to develop faith in the Buddha's attainments is by just doing really simple things, like understanding, it's good to be kind and generous. Seeing the relationship there is going to be very important, like practicing my ethics and keeping my precepts. Doing that, I can see the results of my actions. And this is a maybe much more mundane form of confidence, but for me it's a much more stable and strong form of confidence because I can see the results for myself. I'm not a stream enterer. I don't have that kind of unshakable faith. I'm not completely sure how I'll get there, but I can understand in these very basic ways, practicing the Eightfold Noble Path, that I can see the results in my own self. I can see if I use harsh speech that I hurt someone. I can see if I tell a lie I feel bad. So this for me is a much more meaningful way of developing faith. It might seem boring, it might not be very abstruse or very profound, but being able to see for yourself is, for me, the key. And so the Buddha, when he talked about developing faith and developing in the spiritual path, he did use that gradual method of training. And I think there's a reason for that, because faith and wisdom go together. The more confidence you have, the more certainty you are of the path. So when the Buddha taught that gradual path of instruction, he always began with generosity. Generosity is something that we can see here and now. We can understand, this is good for me. This is good for others. And then he talked about ethics, saying, these things are wholesome, these things are unwholesome, these lead to a bad result, these lead to a good result. Follow this, don't follow that. And we can see that, again, it becomes very real. He also spoke about the heavenly realms. And for many of us today, perhaps this is not a low form of faith. Many of us, this will be a kind of high kind of faith, like, heavenly realms, do they really exist? How am I expected to believe in that? But the Buddha said that the heavenly realms could be attained because of our practice of generosity, because of our practice of ethics, because of our study of the Dharma, and because of our faith. So these things will lead to rebirth in the heavenly realms, he said. And so that's something for you to examine. Interestingly, this idea of the heavenly realms was also part of the Buddha's definition of right view. So some of you may have heard the definition of right view that goes something like, there is value in giving, there is meaning in sacrifice, there is mother and father, there is beings who are spontaneously reborn, there are ascetics and Brahmins practicing well who will become enlightened. And so those beings that are born spontaneously, they're the non-returners who get born in the heavenly realms, and they become enlightened from there. And so for the Buddha, part of right view was this idea that there are heavenly realms, that there are beings who are reborn in heavenly realms. And so for me, that's quite interesting to think about, that there's this idea that this is a right view that the Buddha talked about. And so, of course, right view belongs to the wisdom aspect of the path. And both faith and wisdom, as I said before, have a role in eradicating doubt, uncertainty, and ignorance. So this is what the Buddha talked about. He talked about generosity, ethics, talked about the heavens. And then he got a bit more technical and he talked about things like the drawbacks, the adinavas of sensual pleasures, these things are limited, they don't lead to happiness, they lead to problems, that they have many drawbacks. And then he talked about renunciation. So you can see that he's building up, theme by theme, confidence in his teaching. Starts with something like generosity, it's easy to see, ethics, easy to see, heavenly realms, maybe a bit harder to see, sensual pleasures have drawbacks. What? He's developing the mind of the listener so that by the time you get to this talk on the drawbacks of sensual pleasures, you've already attained some confidence in him as a teacher. Start to believe a little bit more that you can trust what the Buddha is saying. But then he talks about these drawbacks, he talks about renunciation. And only then, he says, when he can see that the listener's mind is ready and prepared, only then does he introduce the topic which is unique to the teachings, which is the Buddha's insight of the Four Noble Truths. So he doesn't just dive in with these profound ideas. He slowly builds the groundwork up so that the person can develop confidence in him as a teacher, so that when it comes to these more profound aspects of the path, they have that confidence, they have that faith, they have that belief that the Buddha is talking in a way that they can understand and can develop learning and wisdom from. So this is the gradual instruction, and this aspect of this gradual teaching, I think, is really important. Sometimes the Buddha referred to it as being like the sloping floor of the ocean, that the ocean just gradually drops away from the land. It's not a sudden drop. I think modern oceanography might disagree, but for the time of the Buddha, they could see that there was a gradual incline away from the land. But it wasn't sudden, it just didn't suddenly drop into the ocean, but it was a very gradual thing. And he says this is like the path that he's outlined. It's not a quick path, it's a gradual path. It slopes away, but there's momentum there. There's gradual building up of good qualities. And this is something that's very profound, that it isn't just a singular act that we're going to do that's going to get us to enlightenment. It's a combination of many things. Sometimes people really focus on their practice of meditation, aiming to get that stream entry in a 7-day retreat. But more likely, we're going to have success in our spiritual path if we practice every day these good things that lead to wholesome states that will build and build and build and become very powerful, so that we get that momentum that is like that sloping away, like rolling down a hill. We'll get faster and faster and faster. The Buddha often talked about this kind of drop-by-drop nature of developing understanding, developing conviction on the path. He talked about how you can get the right causes and conditions which allow for growth. In the same way that sloping terrain under the sea has certain conditions attached to it. There's an incline, anything travelling down on the ocean bed will get momentum. There's a cause to that momentum, there's a condition there. In the same way, the Buddha talked about causes and conditions as being necessary for our progress on the path. And this is also true for faith, for Saddhā. There is a nutriment, an ahara, and the nutriment for developing faith is listening to the teachings, listening to the Dhamma. The nutriment for developing the ability to hear the Dhamma is to associate with good people. Saparisas, good people. They can be enlightened beings, they can be people on the path to enlightenment, good people who have an understanding of the teachings, who have an understanding of the Dhamma, and its meaning and its truth, and also have an understanding of self. So when we associate with good people, good teachers who understand the Dhamma, then we will increase in many qualities. Our ethics will increase. We'll understand, they say, the wise say, don't do this, it's harmful, do this, it's good. We'll have increase in our meditation, our ability to meditate, and increase our wisdom. We'll get more understanding of how things work, how they fit together, and we'll have more opportunity for freedom, for release. So this listening to the Dhamma depends upon having an association with a good teacher. And it kind of makes sense, like when you think about it, doesn't it? You needed to hear the Dhamma from someone, which is why it's so profound. When the Dhamma appeared in the world, it was because the Buddha had accessed the Dhamma. And through his ability to teach, many other beings were able to gain conviction, Saddhā, faith in the Dhamma, and eventually that would lead to liberation. So in the Vijja Sutta, which I often talk about in the Anguttara Nikaya 10s, the Saparissa, the good person, the teacher who has these qualities, is compared to rain that falls on a mountaintop. It's a very beautiful image. This rain falls drop by drop, and the raindrops fill up the crevices, the gullies, fills up the rivulets on the top of the mountain, and these fill up the ponds. Ponds fill up the lakes fill up the streams, and the streams fill up the rivers, and the rivers fill up the ocean. This beautiful sequence that we can see, that the ability for us to develop in the path is dependent on causes and conditions. But when we have those causes and conditions in place, there is a momentum that occurs. The rain that falls on the mountaintop will flow down to the ocean. It's a very beautiful image. And in the same way, when we have the right nutriments in place, where we listen to the Dhamma from a good teacher, then we have the nutriment for faith to grow and develop on the path. And so sometimes it's very difficult for us to accept, aspects of the teaching that might be beyond our experience. And so there might be a bit of a contradiction, perhaps, for you, thinking about things like rebirth or karma, the heavenly realms, Mara. It might be difficult for us to accept these things. We have to have some humility in ourselves, that, maybe some people know better than us, but we might also have to have that interest, that drive, that motivation to find out for ourselves. And so when it comes to understanding these aspects that we don't yet fully understand or don't yet fully comprehend, again, I'd encourage you to just come back to those things that you can see, that you can understand. When you hear the Dhamma, you feel good, you feel inspired, you feel like you've got something in your toolkit that helps you. So that's the most important thing. And I think that stock standard phrase that we often find in the suttas at the end of a discourse, when there's been a person listening, perhaps for the first time, to the Buddha explains the Dhamma. It could be anything about right speech, or that this is good conduct, this is what spiritual friendship is, whatever. And this person will say, "Magnificent, Master Gautama." Perhaps those who read the suttas will know this little stanza. "Magnificent, Master Gautama." Just as if you are upturning something that had been turned over, just as if you had revealed something that was hidden, just as if you had shown the way to someone who was lost, holding a lamp in the darkness for those with eyes to see. In the same way, Master Gautama, you've allowed me to see the Dhamma. And they would then say these words. They would say, "I go to the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha for refuge. Please accept me as a lay follower for life." And these words are the ultimate expression of our faith. So when we say this at the beginning of our practice, and we say, Itipiso Bhagawa, or we go for refuge to the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, this is an expression of our belief in the Dhamma, our understanding of the profound inside of the Buddha, and a belief that we are able to attain the stages of enlightenment that the Buddha said, making us in the future perhaps one of the Arya Sangha, the 8 types of individuals. And so I invite you to think about moments in your life where you've heard some Dhamma and you've had that light bulb moment, where something has made some sense, where you've read something that has meant something to you because it has shown you a path, it's shown you a way to live, a way to be, where you've experienced something in your meditation that's made you look at the world in a completely different way. And these moments are very precious. They're very profound. And they, if you let them, will impact your life in a very, very deep way. And this is what we want to get back in contact with through that practice of Dhammanussati that we did just before. This is what we can reconnect with regularly in our practice of going for refuge, of reciting the recollections of the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. So these are valuable opportunities to express our faith, not in a ritualistic way, not in a ceremonial or thoughtless way, but in a profound way, a very deep way that matters. And by connecting these things, by connecting our hearing of the Dhamma with our understanding of the Dhamma, this is where we have this opportunity to develop faith and confidence, and this is where we will get the wisdom that comes from the Dhamma, and this is how we will make progress on the Buddha's path. So I offer these few words on Saddhā to you today, hoping that they'll be of some benefit to you. And we have some time for some questions. If you want, you can ask on the chat screen, or you can unmute yourself and ask directly. Dear Yupa says, thank you, Bhante, a beautiful talk. Thank you. Will I be able to remember that next week? Well, luckily now we have the videos. So yes, it is difficult to remember the Dhamma, and I actually believe that this is a problem for us, because this is essentially what mindfulness means in Pali Sati. This is this ability to remember, and it's really important to remember. So one of the reasons that we don't remember is because we don't spend enough time on the teachings, and we don't look at them in the right way. So with a lot of Dhamma talks online, it's very easy to see it just like any other form of entertainment. You just kind of tune in for a bit of Dhamma talk, sit there, maybe you don't even pay attention, maybe you're moving around, maybe having a cup of tea, having some dinner, falling asleep on the couch, but this isn't going to help. So if you're paying attention the first time you hear Dhamma, then you're more likely to remember it. And when we have the ability to just go back to YouTube and check that talk, or the ability to just open a book or search on Sutta Central for that talk, or for that sutta, then this is actually a drawback for us, because we're not so invested in remembering it. And you think back to the time of the Buddha, those nuns and monks and lay people, they didn't have any of those things. And the teachings were remembered and recited. And when you look at the amount of books it takes to fill up the Tipitaka, then you see that there's a lot of things that people had to remember. And I'm always in awe and so grateful for those monks and nuns who could remember so much, and that it was retained and came down to us so perfectly. It's such a blessing, really an amazing thing. And so the least we can do is try to memorize a little bit of Dhamma that matters to us. And the way that I do that is to read a sutta and to ponder its meaning, to really think about it, to engage with it so that I don't forget, and then to see how it applies to my own life, to my own practice, and to make connections. And so this is a kind of synthesizing, which is a pedagogical term, where we synthesize the theory and it becomes a part of us, an understanding within us. And this is why I mentioned those things in the meditation before about the power of pondering. Anyway, some more questions coming up. Some people take notes during talks. Others say just listen and let it wash over you. What are my thoughts? Well, thank you for asking, Alex, because I was always a note taker. And even now, if I'm on a retreat and it's like a sutta retreat, I'll take notes. And the reason is because if you want to go back to those notes, then it's much easier to look through a notebook than it is to have 20 recordings of a 10-day retreat and then have to listen to find where that bit that you wanted to know was mentioned. So that's one disadvantage of not taking notes, is if you want to find out, then you have to go to those recordings, or if you don't take notes and you don't have recordings, it's gone forever. But the main reason I take notes is because I feel like I'm more engaged, and when I'm more engaged, I'm listening more. So sometimes when I see people just letting the Dharma wash over them, yes, that could be really powerful if you're really paying attention. But if the mind is straying away, if you're not really listening, if you're not taking it into your heart, then it doesn't have the same effect. But at the same time, sometimes taking notes can be a bit of a distraction too, and sometimes we might get more benefit from listening, especially when it comes to some of the instructions, because some of the instructions are like sequences of progression in the mind. So sometimes when you're listening to a talk and you're doing nothing, you can actually start to experience those progressions in yourself. So that's something that we should be aware of too. Okay, good. Please take care, everybody, and stay sane. And keep reflecting on how fortunate you are to have encountered the Dhamma in this lifetime. And I wish you all a great amount of happiness and joy, and a very good weekend. See you perhaps online on Sunday, or definitely look forward to seeing you Thursday night and Friday night again online. So take care, everyone.
Thank you, Bhante.